evening, honorable members. Please be seated.
Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act, adjourned debate. Honourable Ms. Isaac.
Other members are wishing to join the debate on Bill 18 in second reading. Seeing none, I will call the question. On Bill 18, the Utility Commodity Rebate Act, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried.
Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act, is now read a second time. For second reading.
Very delayed division. Division has been called. Ring the bells. the division has been called on Bill 18, the Utility Commodity Rebate Act. All those in favor, please stand.
Honorable Mr. Schweitzer, Honorable Mr. Panda, Honorable Mr. Copping, Honorable Mr. Taves, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Reid, Honorable Mr. Orr, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Scow, Honorable Mr. Nally, Honorable Mr. Ellis, Mr. Gottfried, Mr. Smith, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Rain, Mrs. Ahir, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Nixon, Ms. Sweet, Member Phillips, Mr. Sabir, Mr. Egan, Ms. Ganley, Mr. Fian, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Long, Member Loyola, Member Carson.
Any opposed?
Madam Speaker, for the motion, 28. Against, 0.
Honorable members, that is carried.
For second reading, Bill 13, Financial Innovation Act, adjourned debate, Mr. Nielsen.
Members to join the debate, the Honorable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to, just reiterate the importance of Bill 13. I think that it definitely is necessary, and, it's some important ways by which we can change financial products and improve consumer protection. However, I also know, Madam Speaker, that there's always the bills that we have before us, and then the time as it progresses. And I'm just looking at Bill 18 and the urgency of, getting some movement and progress around Bill 18. And so I would like to request to adjourn debate and move to Bill 18.
Having heard the motion to adjourn debate, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried.
For second reading, Bill 16, Insurance Amendment Act 2022, Honorable Mr. Taves.
The Honorable Minister of Finance and President of Treasury Board to move Bill 16.
Second reading.
Second reading.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I, in fact, rise to move second reading of Bill 16, the Insurance Amendment Act 2022. Bill 16 proposes measures that would help ensure an efficient regulatory framework, support growth of Alberta's insurance industry, and advance our efforts to modernize Alberta's financial services sector. Madam Speaker, Alberta's Recovery Plan, our strategy for economic diversification, recognizes the tremendous potential for expanding the financial services sector in the province. To this end, I recently introduced legislation to promote innovation in the financial services sector by allowing companies to test new products and services. This legislation is the first of its kind in Canada, one that will spur investment in innovative and new technologies and position Alberta's economy for growth in the financial services sector. Bill 16 takes us a step further in these efforts with amendments to insurance legislation for commercial entities. The proposed amendments in Bill 16 relate to two insurance statutes, the Insurance Act and the Captive Insurance Companies Act. I'll go over the amendments to each, starting with the Insurance Act. Proposed amendments to the Insurance Act are intended to advance government's efforts to increase insurance capacity in the province by facilitating access to reinsurance. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies. As a result of scarce supply of insurance and reinsurance globally, Canadian and Alberta's insurers are finding it very difficult to meet the demands of their clients in both commercial and personal lines of business. Increasing reinsurance availability in the province should have a positive impact on the overall insurance supply in the provincial insurance market. This will help ease the shortage and high prices and better position traditional insurers in serving Albertans and Alberta businesses. Specifically, the proposed amendments would add reinsurance provisions to the Insurance Act, allowing provincially licensed insurance companies to focus solely on reinsurance and to enter limited partnerships. If Bill 16 is passed, Alberta would be the first Canadian jurisdiction to allow provincial insurers to have a reinsurance-specific business model and pursue limited partnerships for capital formation. It's worth noting that the reinsurance industry in Canada is very limited and composed mostly of foreign-based enterprises. The majority are operating through a subsidiary and conducting business in Canada through a branch. In some instances, their business activities are performed directly from abroad. To do business in Canada, reinsurers may choose to be licensed, often referred to as admitted or unlicensed. Admitted reinsurers are federally licensed and supervised by the Federal Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. Much of the existing global reinsurance capacity is located in Europe, the United States, and Bermuda. Therefore, it can be challenging to access reinsurance if you're a Canadian or an Alberta-based insurer. In addition, Madam Speaker, we're continuously seeing pressure to reduce Canadian insurance capacity through actions taken in Europe against insurers supporting fossil fuel projects such as Canadian pipelines. Add that to the current global hard insurance market, and I'm sure we all can appreciate the challenges for many commercial entities to meet their insurance needs. That's why it's imperative we do what we can to allow the insurance industry to attract capacity to Alberta and to help diversify our provincial insurance sector. Diversifying Alberta's insurance sector has both short and long-term benefits for the province's economy. Greater insurance options will help commercial entities with immediate insurance needs. Greater activity in the insurance industry will help attract investment, strengthen Alberta's financial services sector, and support economic diversification. That's why in the fall of 2021, we passed the Captive Insurance Companies Act, which will come into force this summer and allow the formation of captive insurance companies right here in Alberta. We're very excited to be only the second province in Canada, next to BC, to come into the global insurance market as a captive's domicile. The Captive Insurance Companies Act is expected to come into effect this summer once we finalize the accompanying regulations. Right now, we're putting the finishing touches on the legislation itself, with an amendment being proposed in Bill 16. The amendment proposes new redomestication provisions for the Captive Insurance Companies Act to specifically address the relocation of foreign captives to the province. These new provisions in the legislation would help clarify how companies can bring their foreign captives to Alberta, that is, having their insurance companies together with the rest of their business geographically. If passed, the amendment will ensure forthcoming rules for setting up a captive in Alberta are straightforward. This will make it easier for Alberta businesses to evaluate decisions on bringing their foreign captives home and to do so without interruption to the operation of their captives. This is a very important consideration when making business decisions about relocating an existing captive to another jurisdiction. I'm pleased we have an opportunity to refine our legislation before it comes into effect to ensure it's straightforward, on par with legislation of other captive jurisdictions, and most importantly, built on feedback from experts and stakeholders. Alberta is well positioned to soon welcome captives. In addition to new provisions on reinsurance and captive insurance, Bill 16 proposes several administrative amendments to the Insurance Act. This will help ensure clear and efficient regulatory framework for the conduct of insurance business in the province and maintain adequate protection of consumers. Overall, Bill 16 supports the positive momentum for creating opportunities in every sector of our rapidly growing economy. The proposed measures will help create a regulatory framework that will help generate more insurance activity right here in Alberta. This will lead to more opportunities for Albertans in sophisticated finance and insurance positions or careers, and boost the investment potential of our entire financial services sector. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would like to adjourn debate.
Motion to adjourn debate. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried.
Committee of the Whole.
members, I'd like to call Committee of the Whole to order. Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 18, the Utility Commodity Rebate Act. This is its first time in Committee of the Whole. Any members wishing to join the debate? The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Yes, Madam Chair, and thank you very much. I am pleased to rise and speak to Bill 18. As I think we have discussed in the House and as we have voted recently, the official opposition in general is in favor of this bill. However, we believe that it can be made better in some ways, and with that in mind, I plan to move a series of amendments beginning with this one.
Honourable Member, please proceed to read it into the record.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I move that Bill 18, the Utility Commodity Rebate Act, be amended in Section 3 by adding the following immediately after subsection 3. Subsection 4, a rebate required to be provided under this Act in relation to the use of a utility commodity between November 1st, 2021 and April 30th, 2022 must be provided no later than May 31st, 2022. The purpose, Madam Chair, of this amendment is to put a timeline into place. So, we've seen with respect to natural gas rebates a promise that it would be coming in the budget, and then in the budget it was sort of deferred until fall. And with respect to electricity rebates, we've seen 6 and some portion of a week go by at this point since it was promised. And my understanding, at least from the Associate Minister's comments in the media, is that we are not expecting that rebate until June or July. And so the purpose of this amendment, Madam Chair, is to bring that date back, because I think the issue that we have is that this situation is urgent. It is significantly urgent for Albertans. Another few months is likely to be far too much for those Albertans. So, we have certainly heard, and we've been getting volumes of correspondence, a lot of correspondence on this issue, from people who are basically writing to us to say they're making the decision between keeping the heat and lights on and buying groceries. So that is a dire situation for many Albertans. It is a situation that is of immediate concern to them. And so the purpose here of this amendment is to ensure that this moves forward in a timely manner. I think, this act, which is before us today, is an act which essentially mirrors a natural gas act from 2001 and just adds electricity into that act. So it's very straightforward. It's a very easy drafting job. I would imagine it could have been done in one day, to be perfectly honest. And yet, we waited 5 weeks to see it come before the House. And so the concern I have is that I'm not sure that the government feels the sense of urgency that Albertans feel on this file. And so what we are trying to do is to amend the Act to ensure that that sense of urgency is through. And I know the government is going to say, we didn't pass the Act in one day, therefore we don't actually really want it to go through. And Madam Chair, I think it's worth just taking a moment to outline why that is completely absurd as an argument. So to begin with, like I say, this act itself is essentially a copy-paste from a previous act, just kind of adding in electricity. It could have been introduced the day after the rebate was promised. It was not. Instead, we waited 5 weeks. And apparently, we're still going to be waiting another 2 months till the end of June or beginning of July before Albertans see relief. So I think, I don't know, it's clear to me that this could have moved faster than it did, and it hasn't. And so rather than simply opposing, rather than simply complaining, we have come forward to try and help make this legislation better, to try and do something that is important to all Albertans, to try and ensure not some sort of like fake, they didn't vote for the bill the same day it was introduced, but like a real timeline that puts real money in the hands of Albertans in a real and timely manner. And I think, Madam Chair, that every member of this House owes it to their constituents to give real consideration to this, because I imagine that the members opposite are getting the same emails we are from people who are not partisans. They are just desperate and under stress, and they need assistance now. And so, even though we believe that the amount of the rebate proposed by the government is insufficient, and it seems that at least some members of the UCP's own caucus agree with that, we do think that sooner is better, and more timely rebate is definitely better. I think, there are people who are behind right now who face disconnection because this government was unwilling to support an extension on that ban. And I think that those individuals need the money. And I think that I would hope that many members of this chamber understand what that's like when you have a sudden and unexpected increase in your costs. And Albertans have seen a lot of sudden and unexpected increases in their costs. They've seen utilities going through the roof. They've seen car insurance going through the roof after the cap was removed on that by this government. They've seen tuition hikes. They've seen interest on student loan payments go up. And all of these factors are coming together to combine to make sort of the perfect storm. These aren't people who are being frivolous or wanting a new iPhone or something like that. They are people who are doing their best to pay their basic costs and get by, and they are genuinely struggling to do that. And I think we owe them that help. I think we owe them that help in a timely manner. So even though I continue to oppose the proposed amount of the rebate, and I believe that it ought to be higher, I do think that we should move forward as quickly as possible. And so with that, I would urge all members of this House to vote in favor of this amendment, because I think it will help constituents throughout the province.
Well, members, I forgot to note this is Amendment A1. Are there any members that wish to speak to Amendment A1? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A1 as moved by the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That amendment is defeated. A division has been called. Ring the bells. members, the division has been called on Amendment A1. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand.
Ms. Sweet, Member Phillips, Mr. Sabir, Mr. Egan, Ms. Ganley, Mr. Fian, Member Carson, Member Loyola.
Any opposed, please stand.
Honorable Mr. Schweitzer, Honorable Mr. Panda, Honorable Mr. Copping, Honorable Mr. Taves, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Reid, Honorable Mr. Orr, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Scow, Honorable Mr. Nally, Honorable Mr. Ellis, Mr. Gottfried, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Allard, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Rain, Mrs. Ahir, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Long, Mr. Williams.
Madam Chair, for the amendment 8, against 22.
Honorable members, that amendment has been defeated. Back on the main bill, Bill 18, in Committee of the Whole, the honorable member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That was disappointing to see, but fortunately, I am prepared with another one. Let's wait for that to reach the table.
Honorable members, this will be known as Amendment A2. Honorable member, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I move that Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act, be amended as follows. A, by adding the following immediately after Section 4.3, subsection 4, despite any provision to the contrary in any other enactment, a distributor may not disconnect an eligible consumer from a utility commodity for non-payment of the cost of that utility commodity from the time the rebate is authorized under this Act until the rebate has been provided to the distributor's eligible consumers. B, by adding the following immediately after 5.3, subsection 4, despite any provision to the contrary in any other enactment, a direct provider may not disconnect an eligible consumer from a utility commodity for non-payment of the costs of that utility commodity from the time the rebate is authorized under the Act until the rebate has been provided to the direct provider's eligible consumers. C, by renumbering Section 6 as 6 subsection 1 and adding the following immediately after subsection 1, subsection 2, despite any provision to the contrary in any other enactment, a contractor may not disconnect an eligible consumer from a utility commodity for non-payment of the cost of that utility commodity from the time a rebate is authorized under this Act until a rebate has been provided to the contractor's eligible consumers. That was a bit of a mouthful. Madam Chair, what it means is that between the time a rebate is authorized and the time a rebate reaches the consumers, they may not be disconnected from their utilities. Madam Chair, as you may recall, the official opposition drafted an act to extend the disconnection ban. So between October and April 15th of any year, people cannot be cut off from their utilities for non-payment. There's very good reasons for that. We are Albertans, we care about one another, and we don't like anyone to freeze. Now, we offered a piece of legislation to the government, and we offered to work with them to get it through in order to extend that ban. So it ran through the summer and would continue sort of run into the ban for next year, so they'd have another year. The reason for that, Madam Chair, is that these are extraordinary times. These are times when Albertans are under an extraordinary amount of pressure. We have seen high unemployment, jobs returning very slowly, a lot of people giving up looking at all. We have seen very little wage growth, especially for those earning less. We have seen a government who has used inflation to take more money out of the pockets of Albertans, seniors whose benefits were de-indexed by the UCP who have less in their pocket, and many other people in a similar situation. So people have less coming in. At the same time, we're seeing unprecedented growth in costs. When the UCP took the cap off insurance, we saw some people's rates go up 20 or even up to 30%. That was a big hit for a lot of people. We have seen utilities skyrocket since the UCP took the cap off electricity. And again, as I've mentioned, we've seen tuition, some tuition going up triple-digit percentages, like more than 100%. We have seen the UCP government essentially start charging people additional interest on their student loans. That's driving costs through the roof for folks. And so, this is a perfect storm of factors because of the policies of this government that have left people in a position where they are not able to cover their basic costs with the income they are earning. And that has been extremely problematic. It's been stressful and challenging. I have no doubt, despite the fact that we don't hear them standing up and talking about it, I have no doubt that the members opposite have been hearing from their constituents, just as I have been hearing from mine, about these concerns. And so my last amendment was to get the money out the door faster, to ensure that Albertans had the money in their pockets by the end of May, because again, this government has been promising for months these rebates, and they haven't gone out. We know, according to the Associate Minister, that it will be at least 2 more months before people see electricity relief, and even then, $150, something one of their own members called paltry. And it may be months more before they see relief on natural gas. So that's problematic. And the people who have been writing in to us are hundreds or even thousands of dollars behind on their utility bills. And so the government having refused our amendment to get the money out the door faster, the government having refused to work with us to ensure that Albertans are not cut off from their utilities while they are getting their feet back under us. We now have one more attempt, and that is an attempt to say that once the government authorizes a rebate, the time that it takes them to process, and with this government, it seems to be a pretty long time, the time that it takes them to process those rebates, people can't be cut off. So if people are sitting there expecting relief, having relied on the word of the government that relief was coming, they can't be cut off while they're waiting for that help to get there. This is an incredibly small thing that this government could do. Having done next to nothing to help people, having told them that it was the market working and that they should feel sorry for these poor insurance companies who are generating record profits. This is a very, very small thing that they could do to help Albertans, many of whom desperately, desperately need that help. And, I'd like to remind the members opposite that we were sent here to represent those Albertans. That is who elected us. Each and every one of us won an election. Each and every one of us had people come forward and put their faith in us, that we would put their interests first, that we would be there for them and take their concerns seriously and bring those concerns to this place where we collectively come together and make the rules that govern us all. And I would remind the members opposite that it is those people that they work for. It is not corporations. So, Madam Chair, with that, I will simply say that this is a very small thing. It's not asking the government to do anything additional. It's just asking them to give people the tiniest amount of relief and to allow them not to be disconnected just in that period between when the government promises them something and delivers, with which this government could be a while, but just that period of time during which the money is traveling to our constituents who are waiting for that money, that they not be disconnected, that they not be left with no heat or sitting in the dark, that they can happily go out and spend that money on their groceries so that they can have both groceries and heat and power at the same time. That is not, I think, a tremendous ask, but I do think that it would be a tremendous help to those people who sent us to this place.
Are there members wishing to join the debate on Amendment A2? My apologies. I saw the honourable member for Edmonton Ellerslie caught my eye first. If you want to give, there we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you can see, we're all chomping at the bit here to respond to this particular amendment because I, like many of the members on my side of the House, I am absolutely 100% sure that they've also have constituents that they've heard from, like myself. Constituents, I remember it was it's probably been about 4 weeks ago now, that I had a constituent that was contacting my office because her electricity was being cut off. And this is something that, of course, is unfathomable to me because, of course, we're going through a really tough time. We're going through a considerably tough time. We don't need to let people know that COVID was very hard on families. And I can't tell you the number of people who I've spoken to who tell me that they're just one paycheck away from not being able to make ends meet at the end of the month. And some people, they're like $200 away, we've heard. And I think that amending this bill to include this particular amendment that's been proposed by the member from Calgary Mountain View is a no-brainer. I just can't understand why the members on the other side wouldn't want. Well, first of all, I was completely surprised when they didn't want to accept the proposal that we had put forward to actually extend the opportunity for people not to have their electricity or their utilities cut off. And I can the only way that I can understand that what the members on the other side of the House are thinking is that they're so blinded by their ideology that government should just stay out of these things. But of course, you've heard me say it before, is that when it comes to supply and demand, there's going to be people who are priced out of the market. And there's people who are struggling because of COVID. COVID exacerbated the economic crisis that we're going through. And I understand that, members on the other side, they're all about making things voluntary. And, for the most part, corporations, yeah, they do their part, but not always. And it's a very difficult situation. And not, like, I want to remind members of this House that people who are going through potential cutoffs of their utilities, it's so incredibly stressful. It's so incredibly stressful to have to go through that process. And even though you end up calling a 1-800 number and you work out some kind of an arrangement, the whole process is stressful for the person going through it. And I just don't know how else to state it to the members on the other side of the House, that this could be easily rectified by accepting this amendment into the proposed piece of legislation that you have brought before us. And it would calm so many people who are actually going through quite a miserable time right now. To not do this would add insult to injury. So I highly suspect that members on the other side of the House are going to vote this amendment down. And it's heartbreaking, to be quite honest. Because I know for a fact that if I'm hearing from constituents that are having a hard time making ends meet, that members on the other side of the House must be hearing also from constituents in their ridings that are also having a tough time making ends meet. It can't just be my riding. So I would highly encourage the members to, give some sober second thought to this amendment, and it's a no-brainer. It would help so many people, and that so that we can actually pass this amendment and make this piece of legislation that you've brought before us a little bit better. And with that, I'll take my chair, Madam Chair.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Albertans want to live in a province where we can keep the lights on, and Albertans expect a government that will protect them as consumers. Not to do everything, but to do that which is in their power and to take common sense approaches to protecting consumers. But, Madam Chair, we have a government who are in cahoots with the companies, who are making every choice they can to increase costs for us and raise profits by now 5 times what they were last year. Albertans have asked us for action. That is why we are debating this legislation now. This appeared nowhere in the government's budget documents. It was only after the outcry from Albertans. Albertans deserve the credit for the minimal amount of action that this government has already taken. But it is only on this side of the House, Madam Chair, where we have a group of people who are willing to actually make it real. Now, this government was not interested in a legislated timeline to get money into people's hands. What they could do, at the very least, is protect people from utility cutoffs while they are waiting for the government to get its act together to send them the money to protect them as consumers. People need us to be there for them right now while they're waiting for those rebates. We know that people need us to be there for them because they have asked us for this action. We all, as Albertans, want a level playing field where the government policy is targeted and reasonable and it keeps us financially and physically secure. That's what keeping the lights on does for all of us and for small businesses and for farmers. But we have a government who are focused on tilting that playing field, Madam Chair. They are focused on tilting that playing field towards record profits that cost ordinary people more. Ordinary people pay for those profits that have now gone up by 5 times. This is a common sense, very simple thing that the government could do, very simple amendment to help people while they're waiting for those rebates. This is what Albertans can support and want to support. A targeted, common sense, low-cost solution to protecting them as consumers. It is prudent. This measure protects the right people, not the obscene profits from the utility companies right now, but ordinary people just trying to get by when the cost of everything else is going up. That is why this House must support this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The Honourable Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thought one of my colleagues was going to have to hold me up. I could try. I would like to thank the member for the comments. I would like to invite them to leave the House of Revisionist History and come back here under the dome, under the realm of reality, and we can be a little more accurate about the actual current events. And the reason I say that, Madam Chair, is we have an opposition like no other opposition in the country, and certainly like no opposition this country has seen, quite frankly. Well, we started off with the member for Calgary Mountain View, who in March was in front of a business telling everybody that electricity in this province was 15 cents. Well, in effect, that wasn't true. Electricity wasn't 15 cents. Electricity was 7.5 cents if you had a contract. If you had the regulated rate option, it was 10.5 cents. So depending, yeah, it's embarrassing, right? So depending on which price you looked at, the member was off between 50 to 100%. Well, Madam Chair, I would suggest, sorry, I didn't see.
Honourable member for Calgary, Boular-McCall.
Arise under 23 HING J. Ministers making allegations and references to things that are not the part of this House record. And I think Minister should stay on the amendment and speak to it whether he will support it or not. So thank you.
The Honourable Deputy Government Whip.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is clearly a matter of debate, and I think the amendment covering off quite a bit of things around electricity, cutting people off, the price of electricity, this entire conversation is very relevant to what the minister is talking about. And the facts that he is pulling from, I believe, came right from media sources within the Calgary Herald. So he's accurate what he is saying. If the members opposite don't like what he is saying, then I suggest they just join into the debate and add what they would like to add. But it is certainly not a point of order.
I would tend to agree with the Deputy Government Whip on this matter. However, I think it's probably important to caution all members in the language that they use in this House and how it may incite others to not be very happy. However, my caution has been given, and I'll ask the Honourable Minister to carry on with his remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly don't want to be responsible for them getting all ginned up and excited tonight, so I will not reference the newspaper article where the member was quoted as saying it was 15 cents. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Albertans deserve an energy critic that actually knows the price of energy. It's the regulated rate is 10.8, Madam Chair, by the way, in case the member was interested. But I'd also, in terms of what we've heard from the opposition, Madam Speaker, I think that we need to change the names of these amendments. So this is Amendment A2. We just heard from A1. Let's change the name to the CYA Amendment, Madam Chair, because that's really what these amendments are about. They are a CYA amendment, and the reason I say that is because the NDP made a strategic error last week, Madam Chair. You see, I came into this House, and in front of the members of the opposition, I asked for them to work with us in a bipartisan fashion. I asked for them, Madam Chair, to have unanimous consent to proceed to second reading, and they refused. They voted to continue with the legislative process. They voted to get the rebates out longer rather than speeding them up, Madam Chair. And so then the next day, I pointed out to the members, again, in a bipartisan fashion, that the judicial chair was, the Chief Justice, was going to be in the House at 3 o'clock, providing royal assent. And I invited the members to work with us to push this legislation through to get the rebates into Albertans' pockets as fast. Madam Speaker, it's hard to speak when they're lighting their hair on fire like that. And so we were certainly very patient to listen to them, and I would ask them to extend the same courtesy to us. See, they made this strategic error because when they voted down the motion that would have sped up the legislative process, Madam Speaker, that was about 6.5 hours after the member for Calgary Mountain View did a press conference telling all the media that the rebates were taking too long. That's right. They went in front of the media and said these rebates are taking too long. And then that member came into this chamber and voted down a motion to speed up the process. And then they threw their hands up in the air. I mean, Madam Chair, talk about gaslighting Albertans. So Madam Chair, I think that the members opposite are discovering that Albertans are onto them. And I think the members opposite are discovering that Albertans are a little more astute than they thought. And so Albertans are not happy. They're not happy that these rebates are going to take longer because the NDP refused to work in a bipartisan fashion. We invited them, Madam Chair, to speed up the legislative process, to help us push this through. And what did they say? They said no. Madam Chair, then they come in here and they gaslight Albertans and they come up with amendments that say, we want to have this out by a certain deadline. Madam Chair, we could easily have made that deadline if we had royal assent Thursday at 3 o'clock like we had suggested. Shame on the NDP. Now, let's go back and talk about some more gaslighting, because the NDP talked about how the support of the support that we're providing is not enough. Well, Madam Chair, the total amount of this support to Albertans is $280 million. That's how much we're trying to rush out the door to support Albertans, $280 million. Now, they will throw up their hands and say, oh, what about the rate cap? Well, Madam Chair, we're providing $280 million over 3 months. The NDP's rate cap, which didn't apply to half of Albertans, because if you were on a fixed rate, you didn't benefit from the rate cap. So they got nothing from the NDP. And the other folks that were on the regulated rate option, they received $108 million over 2 years. So, Madam Chair, I would suggest that the support that the NDP provided pales in comparison to support that we are providing Albertans. Now, in addition, we've also said that we are going to provide a rebate for natural gas as well. And they gaslight Albertans, or scare them. I'm not sure what they're doing. It's hard to keep track. But they tell Albertans that this is a fake rebate. We remember that? The NDP standing up saying this was a fake rebate? And it was a fake rebate because the trigger price of $6.50 was too high. Well, in fact, I know the member for Calgary Mountain View wouldn't know the price of natural gas, Madam Chair, but it's actually trading for $6.75 today. So had this legislation been in effect, then the trigger price would have been released. But again, does that stop them from calling it a fake rebate? I believe I heard it as recently as today in this chamber. So they continue to gaslight Albertans. And that's not the only support, because I bring this up only because the members talked about cost of living in general. And so in addition to those 2 items that I just mentioned, Madam Chair, we also decided to pause the gas tax, 13 cents a litre gas tax. And that is providing, $8, $9 every time an Albertan fills up the trunk. So it's real support that Albertans feel in the pocketbook every time. But in terms of the total support, Madam Chair, it's actually $1.3 billion is the cost of that support if it goes on for the full year. So the total support package that we're providing is $2 billion. And yet the NDP would have us believe that the supports we're providing is not enough. So again, they continue to gaslight Albertans and frighten them. But that's not even the real problem, Madam Speaker. The real problem here is that the NDP lack vision. Now, the reason I say that is I'm not sure if they read the legislation or in fact, they either didn't read the legislation or they didn't understand it. I'm not sure which. The reason I say that is this is actually enabling legislation. See, we're putting this legislation in to enable us to be able to do this now and at any time in the future. But, Madam Chair, if we were to accept the amendments of the NDP as written, it would no longer be enabling legislation. It would be so prescriptive as to be useless down the road. So if we were to find ourselves in this situation 3 years from now, and heaven forbid, Madam Chair, I hope that we don't, but if we were to find ourselves in that situation, we would have to go through this process all over again. So we have the vision, Madam Chair, that they lack. And we are putting this forward as enabling legislation, so it'll be there to support Albertans whenever it's needed. And this is a pattern. They routinely make decisions without understanding the consequences of their actions. It's not the first time they've done this. I remember Bill 6, and I only mention Bill 6 as an example of when they don't think things through. And Bill 6 was the farm legislation. We continue to hear from members there that claim to be driving through rural Alberta, but they can't be stopping in any of these small towns, Madam Chair, because they would be laughed at some of these towns, because these farmers were upset when they demonstrated such poor understanding and lack of respect for the family farm. Had we actually accepted the initial iterations of Bill 6, there would have been porta potties in farmers' fields. Porta potties in families' fields. Madam Chair, we have a 3-generation family farm. It's 2,400 acres in southern Saskatchewan, and my stepdad still goes out there on a regular basis to check the soil and the moisture. But I got to tell you, Madam Chair, he would laugh if I told him that he had to put a porta potty in his field. But this is what the NDP do. Now. Let's come to something more damaging. Let's talk about the coal to gas conversions, because this is another example of the NDP lacking the vision to see the consequences of their actions. So they sped up the coal to gas conversions, Madam Chair, and they ran the victory lap with all of their environmental extremist friends, all their progressive politicians, their leave-it-in-the-ground extremists. And when they were done running the victory lap, they forgot to tell Albertans, by the way, they just sentenced Albertans to higher electricity prices, Madam Chair. And we're seeing it today. In fact, that the NDP keep mentioning the U of C study, which was not peer-reviewed, by the way, but they keep mentioning that study, and that study references the coal-to-gas conversions as one of the reasons for the higher prices that we're seeing. But that's not all. The NDP also spent $7.5 billion on infrastructure when they were in government, Madam Speaker. Now, they'll throw up their hands and they'll gaslight Albertans and they'll say, oh, we didn't approve that. Well, you know, I will be the first one to be fair to the NDP, Madam Chair, and I will say that they did not start the overbuild on the transmission system. What the NDP are guilty of is not stopping it. And I am proud to say that this government stopped the overbuild. And if you're wondering, 2020, we spent $100 million on infrastructure, and in 2021, we spent $0 on infrastructure. Compare that to the $7.5 billion that was spent under the NDP. And the AESO recently released their forecast. And they indicated that they have deferred $1 billion worth of unnecessary transmission. So again, that was something the NDP could have looked at. They could have deferred the transmission build-up, but they did not. And in addition, the AESO forecasted that we will average $150 to $200 million a year in infrastructure, again, versus the $2 billion a year that was spent previously. So Madam Speaker, that's the problem with that caucus, is they don't see the consequences of their actions because they lack vision. Now, in case that wasn't example enough, the balancing pool comes to mind. I released an audit last week that was the absolute smoking gun, Madam Speaker. This audit, done by Deloitte, confirms that they spent $1.34 billion in losses on the balancing pool. What? Yep, $1.34 billion. Unbelievable. And then they turn around and they hang that on Albertans as a ratepayer. So you may remember there was a time when we had a balancing pool rate rider that actually paid money back to Albertans. The balancing pool has given back over $4 billion to ratepayers.
Member for Calgary, Boulard-McCall.
23C member is just persisting in completely needless, useless repetition of things and not speaking to the amendment at hand, which requests minister to consider putting it in legislation so that Albertans who get rebate, their connections are not shut off. They're able to get the electricity, get the utilities they need. That's what amendment is about, and I have not heard a single word about this amendment in last however minutes. So, thank you.
Honourable member for Leduc-Beaumont.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not a point of order. I don't think listing out the steps the NDP took to raise the cost of electricity is needless repetition. If they're tired of hearing it, they shouldn't have done it. And the minister has the ability to lay this out simply because this amendment talks about stopping people from being cut off from their utilities because they can't afford to pay it. They can't afford to pay it because the NDP raised the cost too much for them. And that's what the minister is discussing. It's completely relevant.
Oh, the speeches I've heard in terms of repetition. Honourable members, I think this is a good time to get back on track. and most certainly specifically speak to Amendment A2, which has lots of words. And I'm certain that the minister's remarks will be a little bit more specifically about those, as opposed to other things, or more so relatable moving forward. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You're absolutely right. I mean, Albertans are struggling with the high cost of electricity. Why? Well, because of the path that the NDP took us down, and so I won't belabor the point on the balancing pool. I think the point was made that 1.34 billion was hung on the ratepayer, and that is not being paid back on a rate rider that we'll be paying till 2030. So yeah, electricity is expensive because of the NDP. But, you know, and again, this goes back to the gaslighting. The NDP come here and they want us to do this and to do that. But, you know, Madam Speaker, we put a motion forward in this House to ask the NDP to work across the aisle in a bipartisan fashion to vote to send a motion to Ottawa, basically saying, you know, do not increase the carbon tax on April 1. And they actually voted against that motion. Madam Chair. So on one hand, they come in here.
Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall-Boular.
Again, 23C, persistent needless repetition or raises matter that have been decided during the current session. That matter was decided during the current session. Unless he wants to bring it back for debate or rescind that vote, I don't think that in order for a member to discuss that, he should stick to the amendment at hand.
Are you to speak to the point of order? Okay, Honourable Minister.
Speaker, this is absolutely not a point of order. There's certainly no repetition into this. In fact, I'm bringing up the carbon tax for the first time. And the carbon tax is one of the things that has increased the price of electricity, which is causing Albertans to suffer from utility insecurity. And some, unfortunately, are having conversations about disconnection because of some things like the carbon tax. And the NDP had an opportunity to vote against that, and they voted to support the carbon tax by the feds, Madam Chair. For that reason, I say this is a matter of debate.
I would agree it's a matter of debate. Where this would come into an issue is if that specific topic were to come up over and over and over again, which has previously been the theme with some other things that have been said. So I would caution you, again, realizing this is a different matter, and encourage you to speak to Amendment A2, or not at all, and we can vote with it and move on to the next thing. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But I'm trying my darndest to convince the members opposite in the folly of these amendments. And make no mistake, there is folly, Madam Chair, in these amendments. And yeah, the carbon tax is absolutely one more example. And the point that I was trying to make was that if they truly cared about the cost of daily living, they would have voted with this government to send a strong message to Ottawa to not increase the carbon tax. But they voted against this government and in support of the carbon tax. So, Madam Chair, I don't know how they can come in here on one hand and complain about the high cost of electricity, and then on another hand, then vote against that motion. So, Madam Chair, I think I've clearly articulated as clearly as I could today about why we have to vote down this CYA amendment. And so I'm asking all my colleagues to give careful consideration and to vote no towards this amendment.
Any other members with the Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to be short and sweet, I think, with this. I'm going to, honestly, the minister just stood up and waxed on for quite a long period of time and actually didn't speak to the amendment, which is specifically speaking to the fact of how we can support Albertans who are at a vulnerable situation where potentially their utilities will be shut off. The minister clearly doesn't want to speak about that because for some reason the government does not want to actually make sure that they're being held to account in this piece of legislation and make sure that they accept this amendment where we can then ensure that Albertans will not have their utilities cut off if a rebate is to be paid out to Albertans. It's sad. And what is even worse is the fact that we just saw a minister not only a week ago standing in this very place talking about this piece of legislation, being asked questions about how it would work, and the response that we heard was, we don't know yet, it has to be put in regulation. So the government wants to rush. They want this bill put through. We're giving suggestions about how to make it better, to make sure that the money, the whole intention of this is to support Albertans to deal with their utility bills at a time where they can't afford them. This amendment does that. It gets the money in the pockets of the people that need it and secures the fact that their utilities are going to continue to be available to them. It's pretty simple. And yet, the minister just stood up and spent 15 minutes talking about all the reasons why utilities are expensive. You're right, they're expensive. So accept this amendment, support Albertans, make sure that their utilities are not cut off so that when they get the rebate, they can pay their bills. It's black and white, it's pretty simple, just accept it, vote for it, and get it done. That's what's gonna help Albertans.
Hear, hear. Any other members wishing to join the debate on Amendment A to the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry. I am happy to take a moment to speak to this amendment, and I'm going to come at it from a very different angle because I think my colleagues have articulated extremely well the reasons why this government should be on board here. But one thing that I think should be added to this debate is something about the serious consequences of taking away people's utilities with a little bit more depth from my experience. I was very disappointed, of course, when the government failed to agree to the previous amendment because, of course, it brought timeliness into the bill. And of course, I believe that justice delayed is justice denied, and in this case, I think the government has chosen to deny justice. But what's more concerning for me in this second amendment is the people who will suffer the consequences of having their utilities cut off. Now, many in the House know I was in social work for many years before I became elected, and one of the things I did in my time as a instructor in the faculty of social work prior to coming in is I was a co-author on the Canadian Incident Study on Child Abuse and Neglect for the last two rounds of the study that were done in 2008 and 2013. In that study, one of the things that we found quite clearly in the analysis of the child welfare system in the province of Alberta is that the vast majority of the cases where children come into care or come into the attention of children's services, the child welfare system, is because of neglect, not because of abuse. In fact, there's been some good analysis showing lately that the amount of child sexual abuse, for example, which is an area of my particular focus of practice for many years, has actually been going down through this study. So we're very grateful and happy to see that that kind of abuse is no longer as horrendously high as it once was. But what we are seeing is that the causes of children coming into contact with the system is neglect. One of the significant aspects of neglect that contribute to contact with child welfare is people being unable to provide adequate homes and shelters, including utilities. So I am concerned about this particular bill because I know that this government spends a significant amount of money in the child welfare system trying to address problems that occur in family homes. And we know that those problems are primarily neglect. We know that the absence of appropriate shelter is one of the significant reasons why neglect is identified in a family. So in this particular situation, what we're asking is for the government to ensure that families do not get into the position of having their utilities cut off, because that will bring them to the place of potentially being identified by child welfare as unable to care for their children, which brings their children into care. So from a straight sort of selfish point of view, the government could seek to attempt to try to save some money in the child welfare system by preventing families from being in this kind of crisis. Now, the situation in this case is such that if you get your utilities cut off, it is because you have found yourself in a position where you're unable to pay your bills. And so the issue is just simply an issue of poverty. So if we cut them off because they are poor, then essentially we are making poverty, we're in a manner kind of criminalizing poverty. And that's really not an appropriate thing for us to be doing. If people get their utility bills cut off, there is a double cost here, because not only do they have the problem of trying to pay the bill which they're unable to pay, but once you've had your utilities cut off, you actually have to pay a second reconnection fee to have your utilities turned back on again. So whatever deep well of poverty that you've been in is exacerbated by having the bill not only remain standing, but being added to by having a reconnection fee associated with it. And I'm very concerned that this is a very simple way the government can try to help families from getting to that very horrendous, desperate place where they families who cannot, at this point, already pay their bills are subsequently find themselves further down the well in terms of being unable to pay their bills, and therefore being subject to potential child welfare intervention because of the lack of appropriate shelter, including the utilities. So I think, I certainly agree with the comments made by my colleagues prior about this bill, and I'd just like to add that it just doesn't make sense for us to be working with families to try to enhance their well-being on one hand, and then creating circumstances where their ability to provide appropriately for their children is being taxed to the degree it is when their utilities are cut off. And I'd like the government just to help us to avoid some of those circumstances and to help us decrease the demands on the child welfare system, which of course are being highly stressed right now because so many families have experienced dramatic increases in utility bills, and this government has done nothing for them. This government has certainly had months and months of time to look at this. The government took some actual specific direct action in removing the utilities cap, and so therefore the government is actually complicit in this problem. Had they just left well enough alone, we probably wouldn't be here today. But they've taken action. That action has consequences. The government is responsible for those consequences, and ultimately the government will pay financially. But more importantly, families will pay in terms of the stress and potentially even the loss of their children through child welfare investigations. So I think it just cost the government nothing to just pass this piece of the amendment here. To just go ahead and say, sure, why don't we just do that one thing? Won't really matter that much to us as a government. It won't hurt us in any way as a government. It just simply is a way of recognizing that some people find themselves in desperate straits and could use a helping hand, and the government, by just simply passing one amendment, can help some families with that stress. Thank you.
Are there others to speak to the bill? The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall-Bular.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to speak briefly to this bill. I was listening to the Minister, and the Minister said it's an enabling legislation. And what we are trying to do with these amendments is that we want to put some certainty in this piece of legislation that it's not just that trust us, we will get it right. And the reason that we don't trust UCP, the reason Albertans don't trust UCP is that they are the least trusted government across Canada and across North America, if I could say that. Nobody trusts this government. They said and signed public health guarantee. That was out the door as soon as they became government. They said many things during the campaign, but they never followed through on that. So we cannot trust this government on this legislation. There need to be some certainty. They already refused to at least guarantee that in a 5-week time, Albertan will see a rebate. The government already delayed taking action on this file by almost 6 months. Utility costs have been going up for months now. And wherever we go, in our constituency, at different events, when we talk to stakeholders, they are concerned about the rising costs of utility. And well, somebody mentioned a study from the University of Calgary School of Public Policy that the number one reason for rising utility costs is that utility companies' profit have gone up by 5 times. And Minister of Natural Gas rejected that study right away, that it's not peer-reviewed, and then he went on to talk about many other things, none of them reviewed by anyone at all, and not helpful either. So this amendment at least will give assurance to Albertans that their utilities will not be cut off during the time they're getting this rebate. No Albertan should have to choose between their utilities and putting food on the table. And that's where people are at. I was in Banff and door knocking outside. And we went to a house where one person told us that basically she has not paid the rent because at least she had some assurance that she won't be kicked out right away. But she paid the utilities so that after April 15, her utility is not cut off. Albertans are struggling. And a few months ago, the same minister stood in this house when asked about what he will do about the rising cost of utilities. And minister said, and I pretty much quote, that news for NDP, we won't do anything, market will fix it. And clearly, that market didn't fix it. And now minister is putting forward this legislation that enables him to intervene in the market. And what we need in it, that there is some certainty, there is some date that Albertan can hope to get rebate by, and there is some assurance that while they are waiting for UCP's infighting to end so they can provide rebate, that their connection won't be cut off. So that's what this amendment is about. And I urge all members of this House, think about your constituents. Think about those who are struggling to make ends meet. Think about those who are on minimum wage and fixed incomes. This bill is about those people. It will help everyone in those circumstances. So please vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Members that wish to speak to Amendment A2, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to rise and speak to this amendment. I appreciate the robust debate that is going on tonight. And obviously I'm rising to speak in favor of this amendment, to which I'm not sure why the government is so opposed to an amendment that would ensure that utilities aren't cut off until the government's rebate program comes into effect or provides assistance to them. And so there's only a couple of reasons I can think of as to why the government would be opposed to this. Madam Chair, if the government stands behind their rebate program and has refused previous amendments that would put a timeline and a collar around those rebates, so ensuring that Albertans will get that assistance, which, I'm not trying to relitigate a previous amendment that was voted down in this chamber, but I really don't understand why the government would refuse an amendment that ensures the money gets out the door unless they're planning to drag their feet. Otherwise, there's no coherent explanation for why they wouldn't agree to an amendment to get money out the door efficiently. But in this case, Madam Chair, facing utility cutoffs is a very real challenge for many Albertans. Members of the opposition during question period and other times in this chamber repeatedly demonstrate correspondence we've been receiving from Albertans with ridiculously high utility rates. And, I appreciate that the bulk of winter may be behind us. But even if that's the case, again, I can't think of a logical reason of why the government's refusing to ensure that folks don't get their utilities disconnected. As my colleague, the member for Edmonton Rutherford, pointed out, the majority of Albertans that are facing utility shutoffs are those who are struggling the most to make ends meet. And we've heard of a number of stories of families and parents that have to choose between utilities and food. Madam Chair, I can't even imagine being in that predicament. I will acknowledge that I am extremely privileged that I have never had to make that decision. But I can tell you that being a parent, I can only imagine the struggle that parents are going through. So, the opposition, once again, is trying to bring forward reasonable amendments to strengthen the bill. And this is where earlier today, the Assembly voted down a previous bill. And the challenge that I have is when party lines and partisanship can blind members of this chamber from the real reason they were elected. Now, unless I've missed the boat in my 10 years of being an MLA, our job is to represent our constituents, first and foremost. I appreciate that we are all here with representing different political parties. But I would challenge any member for putting the priorities of their constituents second or third or fourth. And so if we are all here in the spirit of bringing forward the best possible legislation to support Albertans, then I'm really at a loss, Madam Chair, for when government won't accept reasonable amendments. And I'm speaking from a place where when we were government, I remember on bills that I brought forward as Minister of Economic Development and Trade, acknowledging and accepting amendments from the opposition. Because good ideas come from all sides of this chamber. And any member that thinks that only they have the best ideas or their staff have the best ideas or their party has the best ideas, quite frankly, I think have missed the boat. And if anything, their perspective is quite dangerous. I mean, again, our parliamentary system exists for a reason. So in this example, we've got an amendment that would provide an extra layer of protection for the most vulnerable. I know that members on both sides of this chamber have spoken about and advocated for protecting Alberta's most vulnerable citizens. And so it's disappointing that from the sounds of things that the government is not willing to accept this amendment and resorting to the bipartisan, hyper-partisan attacks. We're in a position where collectively as members of the Assembly that we can ensure before this legislation passes that it's in the best form and shape that it's in. And I find it amusing, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair, when members or ministers will either play semantics or talk about, previously the government asked for unanimous consent to speed this bill through. Where is the government's recognition that the opposition's been calling for these supports since last fall? So for Albertans who pay attention to the Assembly and debate in this chamber, they're thinking it's absolutely ridiculous that the Minister of Natural Gas stands up and tries to accuse the NDP of dragging its feet on this bill, when we've been calling for this bill for months. But we're in a position, Madam Chair, where an amendment like the one that's before the chamber right now can improve it. And so I know that Albertans are getting less and less patient with the theatrics and the hyper-partisanship that is being displayed in this chamber, and looking for solutions, real solutions, to help them with their current affordability crisis. And so my hope is that members of this chamber will acknowledge that good ideas come from all sides of the House. No party has a monopoly, and in fact, governments that think they have a monopoly on the best ideas, friends, we have examples of governments around the world that are not democratically elected who think they have a monopoly on good ideas. And so, in the spirit of cooperation, I ask all members to consider supporting this amendment.
Are there others that wish to speak to Amendment A2? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A2. as moved by the honorable member for Calgary Mountain View. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That has been defeated. A division has been called. Ring the bells. 3. Honorable members, the division has been called on Amendment A2. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand.
Ms. Sweet, Member Phillips, Mr. Sabir, Mr. Billis, Mr. Egan, Ms. Ganley, Mr. Fian, Member Carson, Member Loyola.
All those opposed, please. Sorry, honorable members, please be seated. The honorable member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview, can you go to your assigned seat and then we can record your vote? It's the rules. It's just the rules. Honorable member, it's just you. Just stand and be counted for in favor.
Mr. Billis.
All right. All those opposed, please stand.
Honorable Mr. Schweitzer, Honorable Mr. Panda, Honorable Mr. Shandro, Honorable Mr. Copping, Honorable Mr. Taves, Honorable Minister LaGrange, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Reid, Honorable Mr. Orr, Honorable Mr. Luan, Honorable Ms. Isaac, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Scow, Honorable Mr. Nally, Honorable Mr. Ellis, Mr. Gottfried, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Allard, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Rain, Mrs. Ahir, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Nixon, Mr. Newdorf, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Long, Mrs. Fry, Mr. Williams.
Madam Chair, total for the amendment 9, total against 28.
Honourable members, that amendment has been defeated. We are back on committee, on the main, in committee of the whole. Members wishing to speak, the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Me again, Madam Chair. So I rise to propose another amendment. I will let it get to the table.
Honourable members, this will be known as Amendment A3. Honourable member, please proceed to read it into.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I move that Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act, be amended in Section 8 by adding the following immediately after subsection 2. Subsection 3, a rebate under this act must be provided within 30 days of the rebate being authorized under this act. So, Madam Chair, what this one does is it means that in subsequent instances, because as the Minister noted, the legislation is enabling and it can be used in subsequent instances, that if a rebate is announced, it go to Albertans within 30 days. This doesn't seem an extraordinary request to me. I am sure that we are about to hear from the Associate Minister at great lengths about how it would be absolutely impossible to get a rebate out the door in 30 days, that he could never manage to do that, and a whole series of other bizarre allegations about things that never happened. But I think, Madam Chair, that it would be perfectly possible to get a rebate out within 30 days. In fact, I think Albertans expect their government to be able to move at this kind of a speed. I believe someone used to say, moving at the speed of business, Madam Chair, and I think that's all we're asking the government to do. Is we're not even really asking them to move at the speed of business. We're just asking them to move at, I don't know, something resembling a reasonable speed. That if they promise Albertans a rebate, that within 30 days Albertans will have that rebate in their hands. I don't think that that's a particularly extraordinary request. I don't think that Albertans will think that's a particularly extraordinary request. Now, the government having, of course, thus far voted down our attempt to ensure that the current rebate gets out the door by the 31st of March, rather ironically, I suppose is the right word for this, while complaining that the opposition didn't pass their bill in 6 hours. They can't possibly get the rebate out the door by the 31st of March, which is more than a month away, Madam Chair. But it's the fault of the opposition, because when they requested unanimous consent to pass the bill, roughly 6 hours after it was introduced, we didn't comply. I mean, I don't actually think I have to go on at length about that, Madam Chair. I think it's pretty transparent to anyone who happens to be listening that that's absurd, and absurd on a special series of levels. So this amendment would, simply force the government to keep their word to Albertans within a reasonable length of time. You know, the UCP came rushing forward with this bill, a bill which they have admitted is enabling legislation. It doesn't require them to do anything. It simply enables a rebate. They have refused to provide any sort of timeline on that rebate. We're now asking them to do exactly that. Why? Because this issue was raised with them months ago. It was raised by us, it was raised by Albertans, many people raised the issue. The government did nothing about it. The Associate Minister rose in this place and said he planned to do nothing. Then the government promised a rebate on natural gas, a rebate which, the Associate Minister literally just rose in this place and said, well, you know, if this had been passed, then people would already be getting a rebate on their natural gas, except the Premier has said that the rebate isn't going to be until the fall. And then he said that, no, it might be earlier. Then the Associate Minister said that it won't be until the fall. So the natural gas rebate is all confused. And I'll just remind the Associate Minister that this bill actually deals with both electricity and natural gas. So I'm well within my rights to speak on both. So the electricity rebate then was again also raised. It was also deferred for a lengthy period of time. It was promised, nothing happened. We called on the government to do the thing that they promised to do, and then finally we see an act come before this House. Well, that's good, but the act again is enabling. It doesn't require anything. So we're asking for a time frame, and I think, you know what, that's really reasonable, because people out there, real people out there living their lives, are trying to pay their bills. They're trying to make the decision between their electricity bills, their natural gas bills, and their groceries. That is what people are doing out there. That is what they are writing to us about, and that is what this government does not seem to understand. And all we are saying is that when this government promises those people relief, they ought to provide it within a reasonable period of time. It's not an extraordinary request. Obviously, the members opposite think it is an extraordinary request, but I don't think Albertans are going to see it that way. And I think that we owe them that. I think that we owe Albertans legislation that guarantees that when this government makes a promise, they have to follow through within some period of time. Yes. Because demonstrably, the government will not do it on their own. So, Madam Chair, I am sure that we are about to be delighted by another series of bizarre allegations and a long attempt to describe how a government that has had this problem for months and done nothing about it, and has admitted, after the introduction of this act, has admitted that they don't think they can get this money to the hands of people before June or July, make some sort of attempt to blame the opposition for not passing the bill in 6 hours. Well, again, it's absurd. And just for the record, for members who maybe haven't sat in cabinet or maybe aren't familiar with this, there is absolutely no prohibition on drafting regulations while an act is still before the House. So I will call the government's bluff, and I will say I would be delighted to see the regulations turn up the very day after we pass this act, but Madam Chair, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that this has been 100% bluster. And you know what? Even if the regulations do turn up the day after, I don't think we're going to see the rebate the day after. I mean, the government just voted down an amendment to get the rebate out the door by the end of May, so they clearly don't have any particular confidence that they can manage that. But again, I think, to be clear, we have been calling for the government to do this. They ought to do this, providing Albertans with some sort of certainty as to the time frame in which they're going to see this money, and in a situation where they are genuinely struggling. You know, seeing the money several months from now is not sufficient to them. They want to see it soon. And that, Madam Chair, is why we have brought these amendments. It is why we have attempted to ask the government to get the money out the door in a timely manner. This will be the second attempt at that. It's why, Madam Chair, we have asked the government to prohibit Albertans from being disconnected from their utilities while the government is dithering and unable to get the rebate out the door. They voted that down too. But, Madam Chair, I suppose I will simply say that hope springs eternal. And perhaps some of the MLAs on the government side will take this opportunity to stand up for their constituents.
The Honourable Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was just shared with me that the fastest way to get these rebates into Albertans' pockets was to not have lost $1.34 billion on the balancing pool. That would have been the preferred approach, but I digress. Here we are. Madam Speaker, apparently the member for Calgary Mountain View is embarrassed, and the honourable member is embarrassed because I've called her out for not knowing the price of electricity. And in addition, that is the same member that went in front of the media and demanded that we get these rebates out quicker. And that same member voted in this House against getting the rebates out any quicker than we could have. So the gaslighting that happens on that side of the House, Madam Speaker, is unbelievable. But, I think that we need to change the name of this amendment too. We're going to call this amendment the Failure to Consult Amendment. You see, had the members opposite actually consulted with industry, then they would know that these utilities actually have different enterprise resource planning software, ERP, Madam Speaker. Now, these enterprise resource planning softwares aren't something that you can just go in and change a billing cycle, in 5 or 10 minutes. It actually is much more complicated than that. I can remember when I was in industry and we had enterprise resource planning software. It was SAP, a great program, but you actually had to have SAP consultants come in here to change anything that was SAP related. So, Madam Speaker, the NDP would know this had they done the slightest amount of consultation with anyone from industry, but they did not. So just like everything else the NDP has done, it is littered with unintended consequences, Madam Speaker. So again, my ask of everyone on this side of the House is to urge you to vote against this amendment. This would be just one more example of charging forward without knowing the consequences, such has been the history of the NDP. And so I ask the honourable members to politely turn down this amendment. Thank you.
Others, the honourable member for Edmonton, Beverly, Clairview.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was a great example of where this place has gone to, where the minister gets up and resorts to personal attacks, a level of arrogance I haven't seen since the Redford government, as opposed to talking about the amendment. And the fact of the matter is, this amendment is putting a time frame on the rebates. Now, I appreciate that the government needs to work with industry, but asking for a time frame on this, I don't think is unreasonable. And in fact, when we look at the UCP promise of the electricity rebate, we're now moving into week 10 of the announcement of a rebate without the action of a rebate. I know that the minister's yelling right now, and I'd be happy to go for a coffee with him and explain, the ins and outs of how the government could move faster on a number of these programs. And so, again, we're talking about an amendment to improve this bill. We're at a place, I believe this is the bill that's replacing the previous failed no rebate bill. So 30 days, according to the minister, is unreasonable. I would love for the minister to propose then a more reasonable timeline. I'm just nostalgically thinking of a time, not that long ago in this place, where spirited debate could exist in a way that was trying to get to a better outcome. And sadly, the state of our current legislature, there's a reason that Albertans are disappointed in politicians. Because we've somehow forgotten how to have a constructive conversation and disagree with the ideas 100%. But by all means, please then present an alternative as opposed to just personal attacks. So if 30 days is unreasonable, fair enough. Then, Minister, through you, Madam Chair, I would ask the Minister then to propose a counter. What is a reasonable time frame? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? And I appreciate that the Minister likely has more frequent conversations with industry than the opposition does. And that's not for a lack of trying. That comes with the position. And if we pull out the partisan conversations, it's a reality. And I know this because I was a minister. But that's irrelevant. The point is, how do we strengthen this piece of legislation? How do we ensure the rebates are going to get out in a timely fashion and that Albertans are going to get them in their pockets? And so here we have example after example where my colleague is proposing amendments, and as opposed to the government standing up and speaking about why they are not necessary or how they won't in fact do what we believe they will do, we have a bunch of political staffers behind closed doors writing hyper-partisan comments and speaking points that result in a debate that goes into the mud and is all about character assassination as opposed to the spirit of policy debate. I look back at exchanges between former Premier Peter Lougheed and Grant Notley, who was a two-member caucus. And the two of them would have extremely spirited debates about policy, but were completely respectful with one another and respected each other. In fact, it was Premier Lougheed who ensured that there was a state funeral for Grant Notley when he died. He didn't have to do that. And if they were mortal enemies, he probably wouldn't do that. But I look at where that debate was in our history in Alberta, and I look at where it is today. And quite frankly, Madam Chair, it's no wonder that Albertans are disappointed. Again, whether we're talking about natural gas rebates, whether we're talking about electricity rebates, whether we're talking about how to diversify the economy, Albertans want to see the best policies put forward. They don't care who it comes from. And I think we often get lost in our own Twitterverse, for lack of a better frame, that just reinforces our own point of view as opposed to expanding our point of view, which is the point of the Westminster system. Why we have multiple political parties represented in the chamber. If we don't want to hear any other point of view, then what's the point of having democratically elected representatives from multiple parties? Democracy. What's the point of having democracy? Otherwise you can give war. And so, Madam Chair, the point is that what's disappointing for Albertans is that we have lost the ability to have a respectful debate about policy. And so I'm hoping the minister will rise and speak to why this amendment is not necessary, or if the 30-day time frame is unreasonable. And if there is a more reasonable time frame for an amendment like this, how can we ensure that the rebate gets out the door in a timely fashion without a response of trust us and we're going to do this? I appreciate how legislation and then regulations work. I also appreciate the fact that to get something on a cabinet committee agenda takes months, and anybody who stands up and argues differently, their nose is going to grow, because it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. If this bill was passed in all 3 stages right now, the regulations would not be dealt with tomorrow. They would likely not even be dealt with at the next cabinet meeting. But the point is, for the purpose of this amendment, Madam Chair, if 30 days is not the right answer, then I hope the minister can provide the House with, in his opinion, a more reasonable amendment, and then possibly comment on if he would entertain such an amendment. And if not, please share with Albertans why not.
Any other members to the amendment? The honourable member for Edmonton West Henday.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor and a privilege to rise this evening to speak to this very important amendment, and I thank my colleague from Calgary Mountain View for bringing it forward. And so far, all of the amendments, obviously, as you can see from the voting record, Madam Chair, I've had the opportunity to put forward my support because they've all been extremely important to Albertans. We've heard again and again this evening and over several months now that Albertans are looking for support, and they're reaching out to our offices. And this is one opportunity with the amendment before us to ensure that this is strengthened in a time where the government continues to say that they are ready to move forward with these rebates as soon as possible, and you know, casting aspersions that it's the opposition holding up this legislation. But I would repeat that the fact is, if they have these regulations ready as they claim to, and that it is indeed this debate that is holding it up, then they really should have no issues with moving forward with this amendment that has been proposed by the member from Calgary Mountain View. And I would say the exact same thing for the past amendments that we saw in terms of ensuring that the rebate is put in place by the end of May, that there's a moratorium on utility shutoffs for Albertans until a time where the Associate Minister and the government is prepared to move forward with that rebate. I think those have all been very reasonable amendments, just like the one before us, and I am deeply troubled, as the previous member pointed out, that we have come to a place this evening and several evenings before it, Madam Chair, where we spend more time attacking each other and then debating the substance of the amendments before us. And at the end of the day, Madam Chair, I was sent here, and all members of this House were sent here to represent their constituents, but also be there to say and show that they support those members of the public when the time comes, and that time of need is here right now. And Madam Chair, of course, the time was several months ago to take action on this legislation, but here we are several months later, and with a piece of legislation before us, which in principle, very willing to support and do our best to move it through the legislature. But unfortunately, there is no timelines in this legislation for when Albertans are going to see utility rebates. There is no dollar amount attached to how much Albertans are going to see rebated to them. So all we can do, Madam Chair, in the opposition is try to improve this legislation in good faith to show Albertans that this government is really willing to take action. And up to this point, through the decisions that this government has made to vote down amendment after amendment, it seems quite clear that this legislation was nothing more than a photo opportunity for this government to roll out the red carpet for themselves over and over again, while not actually providing any real support to Alberta families. And so it's incredibly disappointing, again, when we have such a reasonable amendment before us that Albertans are expecting us to work together in this legislature to create the best legislation, to create meaningful change across this province. And right now, what Albertans need is support through utility rebates. And in the absence of that, they need support through a moratorium on utility shutoffs. We have come way too far through this pandemic and through the lack of support from this government, and it's truly unfortunate that we aren't seeing a government willing to put forward the rebates that they so claim to want to put forward in the legislation itself. And so here we are again in the opposition, giving them an opportunity to show Albertans that they want to take real meaningful action, and that the policy decisions around rebates are important to them, more important than the grassroots guarantee that the Premier committed to himself and to his caucus members, which has all but eroded to this day, Madam Chair. With that, I would again urge all members to support this amendment. I feel that it's very valuable, and I look forward to supporting it myself. Thank you.
Amendment A3. Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A3. It's moved by the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. The amendment is defeated. A division has been called to ring the bells. Members, before the vote proceeds, just a reminder that you need to be in your own chair where your name tag is in order to be counted for the vote. After the vote, you may go wherever you like. Honourable members, a division has been called on Amendment A3. All those in favour of the amendment, please stand.
Ms. Sweet, Member Phillips, Mr. Sabir, Mr. Egan, Mr. Billis, Ms. Ganley, Mr. Fian, Member Carson, Member Loyola.
All those opposed, please stand.
Honourable Mr. Schweitzer, Honourable Mr. Panda, Honourable Mr. Shandro, Honourable Mr. Copping, Honourable Mr. Taves, Honourable Minister LaGrange, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Reid, Honourable Mr. Orr, Honourable Mr. Lewan, Honourable Ms. Isaac, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Scow, Honourable Mr. Nally, Honourable Mr. Ellis, Mr. Gottfried, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Allard, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Rain, Mrs. Ahir, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Newdorf, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Long, Mrs. Fry, Mr. Williams.
Madam Chair, total for the amendment 9, total against 28.
Honourable members, it has been defeated. We are back on the main bill in Bill 18 in Committee of the Whole. The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
If at first you don't succeed, Madam Chair, try again. Okay. I have another amendment. Just making sure I've got the original here. There we go. Wait for that to reach the table.
So medium size, this will be Amendment A4. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I move that Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act, be amended by adding the following immediately after Section 8. Report 8.1. If a rebate is authorized under this Act, the Minister must A. Prepare a report setting out how the conditions set out in Section 2, Subsection 1 were met in respect of the rebate, including any causes of an increase in price of that utility commodity. B. Lay a copy of the report referred to in Clause A before the Legislative Assembly within 60 days of the rebate being authorized under this Act. And C. Within 10 days of laying a copy of the report before the Legislative Assembly in accordance with Clause B, provide a copy of the report to the Market Surveillance Administrator to consider whether an investigation is warranted under Section 42(1)A of the Alberta Utility Commission Act. Once again, Madam Chair, I guess as you said, a medium-sized amendment. So what this does is it requires, in instances when a rebate is provided, that the Minister provide a report setting out a number of things, but I would say most importantly, including the causes of the increase in the price. Madam Chair, had anyone been listening through the debate today?
They are.
They may have been, okay, for the many people out there listening through the debate today, they may have been rather confused because both sides appear to be operating from entirely different sets of facts. And that is confusing, as has often been said. Every man is entitled to his own, or every person is entitled to his or her own opinion, but not to their own set of facts. So, what this is meant to do is clarify for Albertans what's going on. We have a report out of the University of Calgary which indicates that a large portion of the upswing here has to do with profits that have, according to that report, quintupled. Quintupled is kind of a fun word to say, 5 times as high as they once were, which is, I don't know, I would say a significant increase. That seems pretty significant to me. I think that's relevant to Albertans. But then we have the Associate Minister standing up over and over. First of all, referring to some legislation that was passed by previous Conservative governments, which sort of overrode the system and allowed the construction of very large lines that are costly. And at the time, the official opposition railed against it. We weren't the official opposition, I apologize. At the time, the NDP opposition railed against that. There are some quotes in there. You can go back in Hansard. Both the member for Edmonton Strathcona and the leader of the NDP at the time, who was the member for Highlands Norwood, the previous one, obviously not the current one, were quite clear. In fact, I believe the previous member for Highlands Norwood referred to it as, you're going to see a rider on your bill that's PC arrogance, or some words to that effect. So the point of this report is to clarify the facts, Madam Chair. And the reason I want the facts clarified is because I believe they show what I have been alluding to all along. So I think this is worthwhile. I think Albertans deserve to know. I think that when prices go up like this, Albertans deserve to know the reason for that. Now, the thing I think Albertans deserve more than that is a substantive rebate, a rebate within a reasonable time frame, not to be disconnected from their utilities while they await such a rebate. But all of those are things which the government has already rejected this evening. And so I am left with this, which is to say an amendment to make sure that Albertans at least understand the facts that are before them so that we can have a rational conversation. And I think that that is what, Madam Chair, democracy is meant to be at its best, a rational conversation where we all operate from the same set of facts. And so I think, Madam Chair, the thing I would say in closing is this. The set of facts before us are as follows. We are presented with a bill which enables but does not require rebates. In that bill are no numbers on how much the rebates will be. In that bill is no requirement to provide those rebates within any sort of reasonable time frame. That's problematic. I think it's problematic because Albertans are struggling now, and I think anyone who denies the fact that these Albertans need these rebates, that they need them in a timely fashion, is just not paying attention. The Associate Minister says that it would be impossible to provide these rebates in a reasonable timeline. He said that we haven't done any consultation. Well, Madam Chair, I can assure you we have done plenty of consultation. We have consulted with the people who are most important to us as elected representatives, and that is the people who sent us here to this chamber, the people of Alberta, the people who have written into us telling us that they are hundreds or thousands of dollars behind, telling us that they cannot afford life under this UCP government, telling us that their insurance has gone up and their utilities have gone up and their tuition has gone up and the cost of their interest payments have gone up, all due to actions of this government. So I would say, Madam Chair, that the people who have failed to consult are the members opposite. The people who have failed to consult are the government members who haven't spoken to Albertans, who don't seem to understand the urgency of this situation, who think that they can wait months and months to do anything about this problem and then convince Albertans that it must be the fault of the official opposition because they didn't pass the bill in 6 hours. Madam Chair, I say it again, it's absurd. We have done our consultation. We have talked to the people who sent us to this place, to the people who we all serve, to the people to whom we ought to be accountable, the people of Alberta. So with that, I will say this is one last attempt to ask the government to do something. If they refuse a timeline, if they refuse a rebate that would actually make a difference to Albertans, if they refuse to prevent Albertans from being cut off from their utilities, at minimum, they can present them with the facts. At minimum, they can tell them why it is the cost of electricity has gone up. I don't think that that's a terribly difficult request. I am hopeful that maybe just this one small thing the government can do for the people of Alberta. And so with that, I would urge all members to vote in favor of this amendment.
Others, the Honourable Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This evening has been a master's class in gaslighting. In fact, it's been the very definition of gaslighting, Madam Chair. I can't believe that the NDP will complain about the speed at which rebates are getting out to Albertans, and then they vote against getting them out any quicker. That is the very definition of gaslighting. And this is all we've seen this evening. And the really frustrating part is when you come up with 4 amendments like this, I mean, this really 4 amendments that means one thing to me. That means filibuster, Madam Chair. It means do everything that you can to distract from the real issue, which is that they made a strategic error last week, Madam Chair, and they're embarrassed, and they're trying to distract from what they did last week. But, Madam Chair, in the 2.5 hours that we have spent doing this, Madam Chair, we could have gotten through third reading of this legislation, and that would have meant that I was then going to be the Minister of Justice's problem, because then I would have went to him at the end of the night and said, when can we get royal assent on these items? But I won't be doing that, Madam Chair, because we're not ready for royal assent, because we're still in Committee of the Whole debating the Fourth Amendment. You know, what the lead headlines in The Sun and the Journal, Madam Chair, are actually paralysis by analysis, because that is exactly what the NDP is doing. They are burying us under paralysis by analysis with 4 amendments. I don't know if there are more coming. I certainly hope not. Madam Chair, I'm going to ask again. We've time allocated. We've had no choice but to do that. My ask of the NDP is to stop the gaslighting. Stop the paralysis by analysis. Help us pass this legislation and get rebates to Albertans, because that's what matters right now more than anything, Madam Chair.
Any other members to the amendment A4? The honourable member for Edmonton, Beverly, Clareview.
Madam Chair, the minister who just spoke should be embarrassed from his comments. First of all, debate for 2 hours in this chamber is not filibustering. What it is ensuring that there is proper, adequate democratic oversight on a piece of legislation. All of us were elected to this chamber to do our job. And if the minister has an issue with that, well, he's welcome to go to other countries around the globe that don't have democratic debate and have a one-party state where you only hear one side and things are expedient. I'm quite happy to live in a country that has multiple parties elected to hear multiple points of view. And in fact, regardless of the number of votes the UCP received in the last election, there are 24 members who were elected representing a significant number of Albertans. And one would argue that no single member in this chamber, no single member received 100% of the votes in their riding, which means Albertans have diverse political views. And so I will not be lectured or accused of gaslighting for doing my job, which is to provide thoughtful amendments to legislation. And it's actions and words of the previous speaker that showcase why Albertans are so frustrated with their elected representatives. I did not hear one single reason of why this amendment before the chamber is unnecessary. The amendment here, Madam Chair, is talking about the minister preparing a report as to why a rebate would be warranted. Honestly, Madam Chair, I think that's just good policy. If we get to a point that a rebate is triggered because the price gets to a point that is untenable for many Albertans or unaffordable, then the government is going to investigate as to why that happened. And we're talking about a legitimate investigation. I mean, The challenge with this place is it seems every day in question period, history is being rewritten. The overbuild of the electricity transmission lines was first commissioned under Ralph Klein. And then it was actioned by former Premier Stelmach's government. I know this, Madam Chair, because I was involved in politics at that point. Now, I'm happy for other members, if they were also actively engaged in 2006, to get up and speak about the then policy of the former PCs. Then that continued under Alison Redford's government, to which, to my recollection, there's 5 MLAs in this place that were here at that time. My colleague, the member from Lethbridge West, cited a number of different news articles to which the former leader of the Alberta NDP, Brian Mason, in between 2004 and 2008, talked about the overbuild and how much it was costing Albertans, and even made a comment about how on Albertans' electricity bill there should be a line that talks about the PC overbuild of the transmission lines. That's accessible. Just Google it. It's an article that existed pre-2008. Then in 2012, myself, the member from Edmonton Northwest, the member from Edmonton Strathcona, and the former leader continued to talk to Albertans about the fact that the PC government committed billions. And we learned the real reason for the transmission overbuild, even though it was being billed and sold to Albertans as this is necessary, nobody believed that. It was to export electricity to the United States. Pull up a map of Alberta and look at the transmission line where it goes. It goes from north to south. And so when members of the UCP get up and talk about this was the NDP overbuilding the transmission lines, that's patently false. It was a decision that we fought against in total for probably about 6 years, maybe a little longer than that. I encourage all members of the public, to go on Hansard, because we are all on Hansard speaking against this. So it's ridiculous for government members today to make the claim that these current high prices are because of an NDP policy. It's patently false. I will circle back, Madam Chair, to this amendment. The point of this amendment is only to direct the minister, for lack of a better term, to investigate when rebates are triggered, what was the trigger? And let's dig into that. Now, despite what the minister says, entities like the AER and the ISO were commissioned to provide oversight. But keep in mind that these are crown corporations who report to government. The buck stops with the elected officials, period. To blame a crown corporation or, to blame a previous government that had nothing to do with the transmission overbuild, and in fact, at countless moments in the legislature and outside of the legislature. In fact, the member from Edmonton Northwest and I were talking about the number of rallies that we spoke at opposed to the overbuild is countless. I can hear members of the government chirping because they don't like to hear the truth. They don't like to hear the fact that this government is falsely accusing the opposition. I love when members talk about, what did you do for oil and gas? Well, we committed 50,000 barrels per day to Keystone XL. What have you done for Keystone? Nothing. We moved Canadians. 4 in 7 Canadians were in favor of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. We moved the needle to 7 in 10 Canadians. What have you done? The revision of history is ridiculous. I believe, and I know, both parties support our energy sector. Both parties support our oil and gas workers. We know that our oil and gas sector is the lifeblood of this province. We know that we have incredible potential in a number of other sectors, including hemp, and opportunities that were realized by the previous government to support the development on the full value chain of areas like hemp, value-added ag, forestry, life sciences, biotech. And I apologize, Madam Chair, I've really digressed from this amendment. So I will circle back to this. I appreciate the latitude members have given me in this speech, so thank you. This amendment is here to provide oversight and to ensure that there is an adequate investigation is not the right word, Madam Chair, but an exploration as to why the rebates are triggered, and then to share that with Albertans. I think that's a reasonable request. I think if the government is truly interested in transparency and accountability and showing Albertans why a rebate was triggered, then I see no reason as to why members of the government would vote against this. So I encourage all members to support this amendment.
Honourable members wishing to speak to Amendment A4, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just will take a few moments here because I noticed that the Minister of Natural Gas has been presenting himself as an expert on gaslighting. He uses the word quite frequently when he speaks, and I am willing to accept he is an expert on gaslighting, at least the actual doing of it. And I think that the simple explanation for all of this is that the minister has been complaining that because we did not agree to his planned subversion of democracy by changing the rules of the House in debate and passing this bill on the day that he presented it. In fact, he already had said that we were filibustering before even a single person had spoken to it. When in fact the reality is that the government side has said that when this bill is passed, it will be July before anybody at the earliest sees any of this money. It's also true that if we debate this bill now, as we are supposed to under the democratic process, and continue to debate this bill in the usual manner in which it's done, and pass it in the usual manner in which it is done, the rebates will arrive in people's homes in July of this year. So regardless of whether or not we've had these debates or not, or whether or not we gave consent to the government to subvert democracy, which thank goodness we did not, the rebates were going to arrive in people's homes at exactly the same time per the government's scheduling. So all of the statements that the minister made are clearly gaslighting, are clearly not about what it is that the minister is saying they're about. Because the outcome, regardless of the minister's ridiculous statements, is exactly the same. So it's quite clear that it wasn't about getting the money out earlier that the minister was interested in. The minister was simply interested in stopping the democratic process in this House from occurring because of the minister's embarrassment and not actually wanting to do what it is that this bill is doing. Now, we know that because when the minister was asked to do something about it a year ago, and the members on this side, well, what will you do about this problem? The minister proudly stood up and said nothing. And then eventually got forced into making some move forward and suggested that he wanted to do this as quickly as possible, and then has done everything to make sure that we cannot do this quickly as possible. Has stopped every one of the amendments that might have moved this forward. Has actually... It was the government side that adjourned the initial debate on this, which we could have had more of on the day that it was introduced, so that we could have got through faster. In fact, this government is not wanting to do what this bill is doing, and I suspect that they're hoping if the circumstances are right, they will never have to do it at all. So, I accept the Minister of Natural Gas's statement, or suggestion that he knows a lot about gaslighting because he certainly demonstrated a lot of it in this House. Nothing that the government has done demonstrates anything other than the fact that they intend to engage in a process that gives the minimal amount to the fewest number of people at the last possible date. Now, I think we've heard that from this government before, with regard to protecting our children from COVID, for example, and many other kind of acts in this House, and so we are not surprised. But what we see is them pretending to do otherwise and accusing the opposition of not going along with their pretense. What the minister, when he gets into one of his rants, is really ranting about is being caught out about saying one thing and actually doing another. And I think that that kind of behavior is fairly classic for this government and is really unacceptable. If this government wanted this money to be in the hands of Albertans today, it would be in the hands of Albertans today. They could simply have had all of the stages of this bill proceed in the most timeliest of manner. But they chose not to. They adjourned the debate initially. And they could have agreed to any of the motions put forward, the amendments put forward, to ensure that the legislation included timeliness and that the government was forthright in the decisions that they've made, but they have refused to do that. So when the government pretends that somehow they would have acted sooner, if it weren't for the opposition, we know they are indeed, as the minister says, gaslighting. He is right. He just simply needs to point that finger at himself, because the answer is that regardless of this process, this money was going to come out on the same day, and all of the excuses that he provides are clearly without justification and an attempt to treat Albertans as fools, something I think is completely unacceptable and should have this government feeling shame, but they apparently are incapable of that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members to join the debate on Amendment A4. Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A4. It's moved by the Honourable Member for Calgary, Mountain View. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. Is defeated. A division has been called. Ring the bells. Honourable members, the division has been called on Amendment A4. All those in favour, sorry, check your seat before you stand, but stand. I want your vote to count.
Ms. Sweet, Mr. Sabir, Mr. Egan, Mr. Billis, Ms. Ganley, Mr. Fian, Member Carson, Member Loyola.
All those opposed, please stand.
Honourable Mr. Schweitzer, Honourable Mr. Panda, Honourable Mr. Chandra, Honourable Mr. Copping, Honourable Mr. Taves, Honourable Minister LaGrange, Mr. Van Dyken, Mr. Reid, Honourable Mr. Orr, Honourable Mr. Lewan, Honourable Ms. Isaac, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Scow, Honourable Mr. Nally, Honourable Mr. Ellis, Mr. Gottfried, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Allard, Mr. Sigurdsson, Mr. Rain, Mrs. Ahir, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Newdorf, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Long, Mr. Williams.
Madam Chair, for the amendment 8, against 27.
Honourable members, that has been defeated. We are back. Committee whole, no amendments. Bill 18. Any members to join debate? If not, I will call the question on Bill 18, the Utility Commodity Rebate Act. On the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we rise and report Bill 18.
Heard the motion to rise and report on Bill 18. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried.
For Airdrie East and the chair of committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole has had under consideration certain bills. The committee reports the following bills. Bill 18. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table copies of all amendments considered by Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Does the Assembly agree in the report? If so, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered. The Deputy Government House Leader is rising.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We had a lot of great progress this evening debating Bill 18. I think it's a really important bill, and I'm grateful for everyone's participation. With that, I actually rise to ask for unanimous consent to waive Standing Order 71-7 and any other necessary standing orders in order to proceed immediately to third reading of Bill 18.
Just a small note. I believe I heard you say waive Standing Order 717, and what you likely meant was Standing Order 77?
77, parentheses 1.
Honourable members, no matter what way you call it, this is a request for unanimous consent to waive a standing order that prevents us from moving immediately to third reading to debate Bill 18. I will ask only one question. Is there anyone opposed to providing unanimous consent? If so, please indicate now. Hearing none, unanimous consent is granted. The clerk.
For third reading, Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act.
The Honourable Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the members opposite for allowing us to go to immediately to third reading. This is an important piece of legislation at a time when Albertans are struggling. We know that there's some great news out there. We know that a lot of the things that we have put in place are working. We are seeing a balanced budget. We're seeing some 130,000 jobs that have been created. We're seeing an economy that, quite frankly, is on fire. And so there's lots of great news. But we also are seeing some inflation. and we are seeing cost of living is now on people's minds because everything is getting more expensive. And of course, there's a lot of reasons for that. And you know, we can look to the coal and gas conversions that have made electricity very expensive. You know, we could also look to the carbon tax. We have been saying this from day one, Mr. Speaker, that you should not be taxing Albertans for heating their homes in the winter. It's just fundamentally wrong to do so. But yet this is, you know, progressive politicians across this country have this childlike enthusiasm for continuing to raise carbon taxes and making everything more expensive for Albertans, and it's wrong. But this is where we are. We also have a situation where we have an overbuilt transmission system. And I have tried to be fair to the NDP, Mr. Speaker. I have been the first to admit that the NDP did not start the overbuild, but they didn't stop it either. And we did stop the overbuild, and I've given many examples. In 2021, we spent $0 on transmission, and it's because we have brought fiscal responsibility to the electricity grid. Unfortunately, we still have to pay back the $7.5 billion, and this is what's causing everything to be more expensive. Utilities are going up, and layer on top of that, Mr. Speaker, the geopolitical situation in Ukraine right now, and that is continuing to increase prices. We have an energy crisis in Europe, and make no mistake, it is on our doorstep, and it is coming our way, and it's causing everything to go more expensive, particularly in the utilities. And so for that reason, we have put forward this rebate legislation so that we would have enabling legislation that would allow us to provide immediate relief to Albertans. While this would be short-term relief while we do the longer-term work involved in lowering prices. So, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage all of my colleagues, I would encourage the members opposite to support Bill 18 so that we can get these electricity rebates out to Albertans as fast as possible. And so I encourage everyone to support Bill 18. Thank you.
Third reading of Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act. Are there others? The Honourable Member for Calgary, Boular, McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to third reading, and the Minister has asked quite nicely for support of this bill. I wish there was a timeline, some certainty when Albertans will get the rebate. Government has been dithering on it for the last 6 months. I wish there was a ban on shut-offs so that Albertans have some assurance that their electricity their utilities won't be cut off for non-payments, but it's not there. Let's hope that government realizes that it's a serious issue and moves at the speed of business and does something that benefits all Albertans. So thank you with that. We will be supporting this piece of legislation.
Are there others? Seeing none, I am prepared to call on the Minister to close debate if there is none. The Honourable the Associate Minister to close debate. That is waived. Honourable Members, on third reading of Bill 18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act, does the Assembly agree to the motion for third reading? If so, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
18, Utility Commodity Rebate Act is now read a third time.
The Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More progress, which is just wonderful to see in this chamber, but I think it's time to call it a night. So I do move that the chamber adjourn until tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Members, having heard the motion as proposed by the Deputy Government House Leader to adjourn until tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered, and the House stands adjourned until tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.